Well, coming up next on YouTube, it's time for Headlines with Whose Views. And today, JT welcomes the one and only Gareth Roberts.
Hello, everyone. Yes, it's me, JT, back here at Whose Views with you. Thank you for joining us for this very special edition of Headlines. I am excited about this one, I can tell you. If you are a regular viewer to Headlines and here at the channel, you'll know that this subject often crops up these days in all the topics that we talk about here on Headlines. Isn't that peculiar? We're in the 21st century, and yet here we are again, folks. And today I'm delighted to bring on somebody that knows all about this as well, to talk all about his brand new book, Gay Shame, The Rise of the Gender Ideology and the New Homophobia. I am delighted to welcome Gareth Roberts. Hello, hello, hello.
JT, hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Yes, yeah.
Listen,
how are you?
I'm delighted. I am delighted to see you. Thank you so much for coming on to Whose Views. And I'm going to say a huge thank you for this. This is a fantastic book. We're going to obviously be showing this throughout this show as you talk about this. But this is such a read. It really is, because not only have you put your observations from the last God knows how many years into this, and not only is it bang up to date with a lot of the stuff that we are dealing with now, but you have put your trademark spin of humor onto stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it's just absolutely fantastic. For those, Gareth, that don't know where we are now, and yes, I know it's coming out more and more and more, thankfully. What inspired you to put everything down into this book?
Well, I was asked, actually. I mean, I'm terrible at networking and pitching generally. I'm always of the opinion that let them come to you rather than you go to them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was sort of fairly well known for talking about this stuff, particularly in the world that I came from, the TV media world, where, you know, nobody talks about it, or if they do, they're completely going along with it. About 2 years ago, a publisher, Forum, who's they're a subsidiary of Swift Press, which is a small but quite powerful, punchy, independent publisher.
Yeah.
The editor of Forum got in touch with me and said, "Look, you write very passionately about this, and you're very funny about it, and you know, this is an interesting subject that nobody's particularly talking about, particularly when it comes to gay men's attitude to this stuff." So he said, "Do you want to write a book about it?" So we kind of worked out a pitch together, and we went from there. So, as with a lot of things that I've done in my what you might call my career, I didn't come out with it all by myself, if you know what I mean. It was kind of an approach and working the thing out between us.
Yeah.
And we went from there. But it was something that I was instantly very interested in when it was mooted.
Yeah.
And I think with a lot of, particularly with non-fiction and live issues, when you're writing a book about those things, generally there's about, you know, there's quite a few people all going for the same territory. You know, there's like 20 other books that are saying the same thing or in the same area. With this one, nobody was talking about it, not in the game.
Shocker.
Yeah, I mean, there have been quite a few books by women and about women's rights and that angle.
Yeah.
But nobody was talking about it from the gay rights angle. There's an American writer called Ben Appel who I think is writing something along these lines. Andrew Sullivan obviously is a very well long established gay rights campaigner activist, and he's writing along his Substack about it. But in terms of books and in terms of Britain, you know, there wasn't much going on. So that gives you an enormous boost in a way, because it's like, well, you know, I'm talking about something that nobody's talking about, and that's you don't have to strain to come out with your own personal take or find some new angle on it, because nobody's discussing it, so you can just go for it. It's kind of virgin territory, if you like. So that's how it came about, and it wasn't. Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, what you're saying there, Gareth, is this is a sort of, I can't stand the term groundbreaking because I hear it every other day about something now. Do you know what I mean? But this is the thing about this book is, I was excited when you announced you were going to read this because I knew where you were coming from personally, obviously. And that's just that this is going to be opening up the truth, and that's exactly what this does. And this is a great volume for anybody who is learning about this subject or coming to this subject to start with, because it's your opinion, it's your observation, it's your take on this as a gay man. And we've seen, haven't we? We have seen our once beloved and great community splintered now, and you deal with that in the book.
I mean, it's a strange thing. I mean, I prefer to use the term population for the gay community, because I think community is a kind of become a bit of a bastardized word that for me, a community is like, a physical reality that it's important. It's like a congregation or I think a village has a community, or a town, or that's where you have a community. A community of people that talk vaguely about the same things on the internet. No, I don't think that's right. And particularly with the gay community, it's like, well, it's like the pebbles on a beach. It's so diverse, to use that word. Everyone's so different. They have nothing in common apart from the fact that they're homosexual. So it always,
even that's in question now, Gareth.
Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. But yeah, it was. But what there was a kind of agreed consensus of gay rights organizations, charities, NGOs in general, and that certainly has been splintered and virtually destroyed and eaten up by genderism, as I call it.
Genderism,
yeah. I mean, I just thought gender ideology, even though it's on the front cover of the book, it's a bit of a mouthful. And ideology is one of those words that kind of, I think a lot of people just don't know what that means. It's not a difficult word, but it's a very sort of academic word. It's it's a kind of uni word, university word, and I think people know what isms are. So I think that's a better way of explaining it to people. I think sometimes when people hear ideologies, they think, well, what's that? It's like when people say, oh, I'm progressive, it's like, well, what does that word mean in the street? I mean, most people only hear the word progressive when it's about some sort of health problem. It's like, so I always try and get down to the most plain language you can get, and it's so difficult as well with explaining, like, again on the front cover, the idea of the new homophobia, because it's very counterintuitive. Thank you. It's very counterintuitive to say, oh, a lot of this homophobia is coming from gay people.
Yes,
that's a very, very hard thing to get people's heads around. And so it's, I mean, even though those things are on the front of the book, as I wrote the book, I was thinking, hold on, these are kind of quite difficult terms to explain, quite difficult concepts to gather. So I tried to simplify them. But it was too late to change the strapline on the book. So there we go.
Yeah. You mentioned there, of course, I mean, I get this a lot as well, as a lot of us do when it comes to things like social media platforms, but also I'm now starting to see more people through this channel messaging me and emailing me, but also, people around me physically saying to me, what is going on? And you actually talked a little bit about that there, about the fact that an awful lot of this brand new, as you're saying here, the rise of the new homophobia, and it very much is that's perfectly on the nail, is coming from actual gay people. Now, in the book, you actually look at this and you discuss this. I personally cannot understand where this has come from exactly, and why they can't see that a lot of this gender, this gender, I was going to say the word nonsense, so I will. Where this is coming from.
Go ahead.
It is homophobic. We are being told you must actually open up to what is in effect heterosexuality.
It's it's very peculiar, very hard to understand. And what I've tried to do in the book is to kind of isolate the main factors, because it is multifactorial, and it is, to use that cliche, the perfect storm. That everything had to be right or wrong, everything had to be in the correct place for this to happen, and there are several things that caused it to ignite.
Yeah.
One of those, obviously, which bedevils us all across any number of things, is the coming of social media. Yeah. I don't think this would necessarily have been a problem in the pre-social media days of the internet, because then we were still not as vulnerable to pylons, mobs, all that kind of thing. I think it's still difficult for us as human beings to understand that 200 people slagging you off on a thread on the internet doesn't mean anything. There are millions of people in the world. So when a company, for example, gets lots of gender activists slagging them off or trying to put them into line, they panic. And they go into protection mode, and they start putting up the rainbows and the progress pride flags and all that stuff. And when really, there is not that much of an issue for their public relations. I mean, we see this in all kinds of things in popular culture. The idea that all young people are on board with this, that this is the future, that this, no, it's a very, very small proportion of young people and people in general, and they're mostly, I hesitate to say, they're mostly nerds that can be safely ignored. Then you have things like the gay rights organisations coming to the end of their line in the West. So they kind of achieve full legal parity. All the things that used to bedevil us as we were growing up. I don't know how old you are, but I grew up in a time.
28.
I grew up in a time when it was still the age of consent was different. You couldn't register for a civil partnership or marriage or anything like that.
That's right.
But, if I knew people that where their partner had died, and the estate, they were intestate, and the money just went to the family and not to them.
Yeah.
All these kind of things. You couldn't serve in the armed forces, and all that stuff. And to their credit, the gay rights charities and organisations turned that round in Britain, particularly, incredibly quickly for that kind of political campaign. I mean, it seems from our human perspective, it took about 20, 30 years, which feels like a lifetime, because it is a lifetime to us as individuals, but as a political campaign to change public thought, that was incredible. That was a remarkable achievement. But by the late noughties, particularly, they'd come to the end of the track in the West. Now, what they could have done and should have done, I think, would be to look abroad, to look internationally, to try and shore up international organisations and look at the many places in the world where that is still definitely not the case. But instead, ready-made for them was coming gender. And this had been sort of creeping in earlier than you might have thought. In another great book, which has been published recently, The Women Who Wouldn't Wished.
Oh, yes.
Which is about women's rights campaigners and genderism in Scotland. They do a very interesting timetable, and it goes back to almost like the late 90s, when you get the organisations that were formerly sort of transsexual organisations, that kind of thing, starting to move into switching to talking about gender, moving slightly towards these other organisations, trying to seep in, get their stuff in. And it sort of seems to the unaware, which I certainly was, oh, well, that seems fine. I was thinking about this because it's 20 years now. 2004 was when Nadia won Big Brother. Was
it really? Crikey.
Yeah, for 20 years.
Wow.
And I remember thinking at that time, oh, well, that's nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm feeling sorry for Nadia when I think there was some sort of conversation going on in the Big Brother house about trans in general, and he was obviously quite upset by it. And so at that time, which is about the time that Labour did the Gender Recognition Act, it just seems like a sort of like, oh, you know, it's a bit like Haley from Coronation Street. You know, it's fine. I mean, there are these kind of men that feel like this, and we shouldn't be nasty to them, and we should make life easier for them. And it seems like a nice thing. But what I didn't realise at the time, what very few people did, was that even things like the Gender Recognition Act brings you slam into a very, very obvious problem, which is right there. And the first, the most obvious problem of reclassifying men as women for all purposes legally is that there is a huge difference in the offending rate of men and women in terms of violent crime, and particularly obviously of sex crime, most of which is men against women. So if you're going to start reclassifying men as women, this automatically brings in the problem of prisons, of sports, of just women's private spaces, single sex spaces. But this didn't seem apparent. You know, this only sort of became obvious as more of the stuff started to come out, and as we started to find out more about what you might call the trans population, because that idea of the sort of unmanned Haley Cropper kind of character is only one tiny part of this, and a lot of it, it turns out, is basically heterosexual men. This is another one of those words that people use. It's autogynephile, which is a bit of a mouthful, and AGP for short, which is heterosexual men who get a kick out of imagining that they're women, dressing as women, doing women's things, whatever they are. And, you know, that as an oppressed minority, sod off. You know,
well, absolutely. I mean, we used to have another word for that, didn't we? Back in the late 80s and through the 90s on the gay scene as well. I'm not even sure if we can say that these days because I'm too busy coming and going with stuff. But there was. I mean, we tolerated these people on the scene at the time, and
you know, although they weren't really there. I mean, I don't know about straight men doing that. I mean, I don't think that was really. I mean, I sort of remember.
It wasn't big, Gareth. I saw the odd one every now and then,
I mean,
you know, in certain pubs only.
I remember once in about 1997, I was in the New Union in Manchester.
And
it was like cross-dressing night or something. We went in, and it was okay, and it seemed to be that everyone had come as Liz McDonald. I remember that. That was the look. And again, I just thought, oh well, that's fair enough, whatever. But you know, that was this whole idea, this peculiar idea that you know, they were always there, trans women fought for our rights and all this kind of thing. What are you talking about? No, I was there. I was in the room for most of these things. No. And what we did hear, as I recall, was that they didn't want anything to do with the gays.
Correct.
That it was like, no, they didn't like that. And this was obviously, you know, because either they're gay men who are rejecting their homosexuality, or they're straight men that want nothing to do with men. They like to put on, you know, their wife's knickers and pretend they're a lesbian. And you know, obviously that was a joke. You know, that was a big obvious joke that everyone used to talk about. You know, I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body. You know, all that kind of thing. And now we're supposed to take it seriously, and that happened almost overnight. You know, it was like we're looking. I mean, in the book I talk about 2014, sort of, and 2013, 15 as well. That's kind of like the nexus point where it all slams over very quickly. I mean, I remember vividly, I think I was just writing an email or something, and I was going to write LGB normally, you know, as you would, and then I thought, well, I better put T because everyone else is, aren't they? And I don't want to, and I'd better put it because that's what happens now, and we just add a letter, and it's fine. So it kind of slipped in under everyone's consciousness, including mine. And it was only a couple of years later that I started to think, well, you know, this isn't what I thought it was. The level of irrationality coming from it, the level of viciousness and anger coming from it was something I'd never seen before and didn't anticipate. And it was so unpleasant a lot of the time, and very unpleasant, and very obviously unpleasant to women that objected. That was clear, you know, from the off. That was like, oh, okay, there's something very obviously nasty about this.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, I remember something similar happening to myself as well, being around suddenly and saying, well, what's the T for? I remember actually literally asking friends of mine, what's the T?
Yeah,
And it's gone on and on, Gareth, as well, because now we've suddenly got the T, we've got the Q, we've got the I, we've got the A, we've got the A, we've got any other blooming initial on depending what day of the week. It's gone too far, hasn't it? And you illustrate this in the book as well by able to say, you know, what could be added, what could be added. It's very confusing marketplace. And we're asking people now from outside all this to look in and be aware of it.
Yeah, it's all just, I mean, particularly all the sort of bespoke identities, you know, and the things that people have just made up, you know, like asexual, you know. It's like, well, you know, no one's ever been, you know, particularly shunned or oppressed or legally for being asexual. You know, it's like, it's a completely different thing. It's like, well, you're not interested. Well, so what? You know, nobody was particularly bothered. So all that kind of stuff going into it is just, I mean, it seems to me that it's the easiest way for a lot of posh kids to get a slice of the victimhood pie, because victimhood now confers status, you know, and they're white, and they're middle class, and they're privileged. So how can they get a foot in the door? And this is the way they get a foot in the door, by describing themselves as demisexual or something.
Or what are these Zeo pronouns or something that have come in now? I mean, come on.
I mean, it's not a new observation, but it is, you know, the sort of decline of religiosity in the West leads to people picking up all kinds of bizarre things and ascribing significance to all kinds of bizarre things. You know, you'll know this, but you know, the great significance that things like James Bond and Doctor Who and things like that now have, which even in our lifetimes, you know, even when I was a kid, people would think it was crazy. Yeah. You know, and a lot of people still do. Yeah. But, you know, the sort of moral tone ascribed to these things of superheroes and Star Wars and all that kind of thing, and the fact that they're meant to be sending some sort of moral message or some sort of spiritual message, that's insane. You know, it's like, but I think what that does speak to is a kind of yearning, a spiritual yearning, because, you know, we've killed gods, and what have we got? You know, but that doesn't stop our yearning for them.
Very interesting, that. Yeah, it's, I mean, that's an incredible debate, that one in itself, really, isn't it? But you mentioned the industry that you are in, because you are a writer, you are a journalist, you're a script editor, you have worked on some of the great British television shows here, you've done a lot of work here. Obviously, with us here on Whose Views, and a lot of our audience that come to us as well, and based around the genre that we're looking at, we get an awful lot of discussion based on why is your industry, why is the media, why is show business, why is alleged entertainment, word used in the abbreviation, why has it gone down this whole, Gareth, I use the word cult, apologies.
I think you're right.
I do use that. Why has, in your opinion and your experience, you had real experience of it and not fitting in, you know, like a lot of us, but you've had publicity over that as well. Why has that that sector, that industry that you are involved in, taken it upon themselves to shove this into absolutely everything? And why, Gareth, double-edged question for you, why can we not see the reaction is we don't want this?
I think going back to what I was saying just a bit earlier, I think what's happened to the TV industry in particular is, in the time that I was in it, it very visibly got more geeky. Now, I am a geek. But I could see it becoming, there used to be a very clear dividing line between the kind of stuff that was in universities that I got taught at university and the real world of the media business. That the media business, we all knew lots of things, you know, that were set in stone, and it was the real world. So things like there is a huge difference between what boys and girls like in media. You know, that everyone knew that.
Yeah.
That was, you know, it was just,
Common
you know,
sense.
yeah, it was just obvious. So with children's TV, it was like, you know, you have to do this and you have to do that, you know, because you have to appeal to both sexes, or you go more for one than the other. So that kind of thing was known. So when I was on the soaps like Emmerdale and Coronation Street, the feeling was always about, well, how do we talk to the person in the street? You know, how does the ordinary person feel about this? And how do we tell this story to them? As I went on, I mean, when I first came into TV, which was in the mid to late 90s, I was a bit unusual because I had been to university, had a humanities degree of a kind, knew about all this kind of right-on, politically correct crap. I knew about it, even though I didn't believe in it. That was slightly unusual. What happened afterwards, and I noticed this coming in, was that more and more of the younger people coming in were fully signed up to that. And I think particularly with science fiction, fantasy, that kind of stuff, the kind of people that are attracted to it, to write it and to take part in it, tend to be from that social group. So, you know, sort of nerdy, upper middle class people.
Okay.
Who have now all been through university and that kind of thing, and where they kind of fed this stuff, the general sort of, I hesitate to use the word, but just general woke stuff. So they become a sort of circle, a bubble, where they think that's what the world is, that's what the future is, that's what everyone thinks, that's what to go for. So that happened. I think what happens is when you say you can't see it, is they bought into it so much, it's become so much a part of their own personal identity, that admitting they've got it wrong would be a terrible thing. And I think also it would be a really difficult thing for themselves as people. I think particularly with the gender and trans stuff, that's very hard for people to confront, because if they're wrong, what the hell have they been complicit in? That's a hell of a thing to ask for people, and it's a hell of a Rubicon for them to cross. Because if they are wrong, and they are wrong, then they've steered a lot of tomboy girls and camp little boys towards a life of drugs, surgery, lifelong medicalization, sterility, all those kind of things. And that is a hell of a thing for people to take in. I think when you had something like, like the lobotomy craze, as it were, or the eugenics craze of 150 years ago, it was easier for those things to be rowed back on, because they hadn't made it outside the professional class. Those were things you could point to doctors or clinicians in general, or therapists, and say, that was you, or scientists, that was a bad thing and they did it. This has seeped into the culture, into entertainment, into the most ordinary things, high street banks, coffee chains, whatever, they've all gone along with it.
Yeah.
Getting them to row back, getting people to row back and acknowledge what they've done is a hell of an ask, because they've all been pushing something which is harmful. And I think that's one of the problems with what you're saying about the entertainment industry, that they've staked so much on it that it's very hard for them to pull back out of it. No matter how far their ratings plunge or their views drop, and people walk away.
It's concerning, isn't it, that one? Because we are seeing this, aren't we? We can see there's a term that goes around, doubling down. I see quadrupling down in certain things as well. It's as though there is a dictate coming out to say, no, you will think like us. It's a running gag on my show. You will be like us.
It's quite interesting when they start blaming their viewers as well,
isn't it? Just
which is something that sort of drilled into me in television, that you never do. because that puts you in a crazy place, you know, because if you're pissing your viewers off, you're doing something wrong, you know, and the idea that, oh, we were just too noble, you know, well, those people can wave goodbye, you know. It's like, no, you're producing a mass medium still, just about. You certainly should be trying to maximize bums on seats. You should be welcoming people in, not pushing people out. And this is what I find really disheartening as a kind of follower of this stuff myself, is that particularly in this day and age, with all the kind of horrible things we've had to deal with lately, we could really do with TV and entertainment that is just pleasant and uplifting, and maybe makes us think a bit, but isn't telling us off, and isn't telling us to go away if we don't like it, or that kind of thing. You know, what we need is something to make us feel happy, which is not a bad thing.
No.
And the fact that a lot of these, using that dreadful word, franchises have become so hectoring and so unpleasant is just really disturbing. And also I think it comes from a very bizarre view of what the people who like that stuff are like. So, for example, I mean, I can only really talk about, you know, the kind of fandoms that I was a part of.
Yeah.
But growing up, you know, when I first sort of encountered Doctor Who fandom in the flesh in the 90s, which was slightly old, really, and to be doing that. But the thing that most impressed me about it and sort of really made me sit back was how kind of, to use the dreadful modern words, inclusive it was.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. But it was like, okay, you know, I'd never seen anything like it. And I remember in 1992, when I first started meeting people, it was like, hold on, these people have known each other since they were young teens, and they grew up together, and they were gay and straight, male and female, different races, all that kind of thing, different classes, and they all sort of got along. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. It's, you know, I'd not seen that before, and particularly the sexuality thing. It was like, oh my God, I was a bit jealous of it because I hadn't had that growing up. And it was like, oh, you know, if I'd known these people, it would have been all sort of fine.
Yeah.
And I would have had this big group of friends that were all together of all kinds of different sexualities, you know, gay men, lesbians, straight people, and they were fine. And then to find out years later, you get a sort of new generation of those kind of posh middle class kids coming in going, oh, we've got to get rid of the horrible homophobia of fandom. Fuck off. Sorry, pardon me. You know, the one group of people that you could point to that had a problem like that, it was not fandom.
Yeah,
it was just ridiculous, you know. And you know, this idea we've got to kick all the, you know, the right wing people. Right wing, you know, there was literally nobody.
I mean, we can laugh because we were there.
Yeah,
I mean, you do talk about that a wee bit in the book as well, about this whole thing. But we are all, and I keep saying this to people, you've got to accept the fact we're all right wing now.
Well,
every single one of us.
It's so ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous and so counterproductive. You know, it's like, you know, slagging people off and calling them things that would annoy your own peer group if they were called that. Well, it's not going to work on another peer group. And
no.
I mean, I've seen a lot of things in my life because I've lived, you know, I'm in my 6th decade now, and I've seen so many things change. But never in my wildest imaginings would I ever have thought that I'd see, for example, Julie Bindel or Linda Bellos, who were like extreme left-wing, dyed-in-the-wool socialist, lesbian, and black in Linda Bellos's case, activists and campaigners being described as right-wing. It's insane, you know.
It is, though, isn't it? It's sheer insanity. Because, you know, the two examples you've given there, and there are more. Oh, you are glitched there. That was a little bit of a glitch. We're all right there, though. I mean, it's a point that, you know, I actually saw a quote from years ago now from the legendary Johnny Rotten, and he was saying this exact thing. Have you seen that one where he says, "I never thought I'd seen the day where all the proper activists from the left wing are now regarded as," and we are talking about proper activism here. Generations, and we're including us in this as well because we did our bit. I certainly did our bit in the late 80s.
I ruffled a few buckets in my time.
Exactly. But we were there because we had to be. We were the ones that were on the front lines to be able to say, no, we are striving for all these things like equality and inclusion and respect. And now I'm hearing these things said against all of us, and I'm thinking, hang on a minute, what?
Yeah. Yes. No, it's insane, and I think it comes in because, particularly with gender, what has been admitted is something totally irrational. So everything it touches is irrational, and every sort of, if it was like if gender is like a little ball going down a maze in one of those little toys, then everything it hits, every wall it hits, is going to be tainted by irrationality everywhere it goes down the maze. So things like this just happen all the time, like little sparkles of irrationality turn up, because what you're dealing with basically is a lie, that people can change sex, and that sex is a spectrum and all that stuff, and that gender identity exists and is a real thing. So everything it hits is going to be irrational. So we're going to see all this kind of mad stuff coming out because it can't engage with reality. Yeah.
It's interesting, though, that continuing on with the whole thing about the alleged show business and the alleged entertainment industry and their obsession with dictating a point of view to the wide public, and also to the fandoms that you've touched on there. Do you get the impression, like myself and some of our viewers do, that they may have looked at these do-gooders, for want of a better word? They looked at certain aspects of fandom and just went, "That's all straight white men, and they need to be told."
Yeah, I think definitely that's what they think, and it's just nonsense. I mean, particularly we're talking about tiny numbers of people. I mean, if you've got a TV show that you're aiming to get seen by like 4 or 5 million people, you're talking about the tiniest sliver of your audience, and in terms of both the detractors and the supporters. So 99, virtually 100% of your audience have no idea about these questions. No idea about this stuff. Don't care, not interested, not bothered. So suddenly you're making your entire show about this, or a major part of it is about this, and you're going, "Oh, we'll kick out these straight white men, these right-wing men that, like, well, all 10 of them, it's like, that's going to make a difference, Why are you addressing your fandom? It's like, this is the sort of action you'd take if you had, like, 1,000 subs on YouTube or something like that. You'd have to think, it would be sane to think, oh, I mustn't do anything that would alienate, a substantial section of my audience. It's what I would do on my Substack or whatever. It's a small thing. With a TV program on a mass market channel or whatever, why the hell are you even considering talking about this stuff? And I think the reason is going back to what I said earlier, that the entertainment industry has become colonized by this bubble of babble from this very small section of the population, and so they think that this is important. They think that this is the live issue. They think that they have to go along with it, and you're left with a situation where people are arguing about the sexuality of cartoon characters, or of children's characters. It's like,
I mean, it is ridiculous, and it's a concerning point as well that it's infiltrated what is very now, in my point of view, a very weak market when it comes to children's television. There seems to be an awful lot of propaganda into this.
I mean, children's publishing is just the worst.
Oh, don't get me started on that. I mean, that's just outrageous, isn't it? What's going on there?
I mean, I would hope that, again, this is going to mostly middle-class kids, whatever. But I would hope that most children, I mean, my experience, kids were kind of very skeptical about the kind of moral lessons that we were taught at school. And, generally. So I would hope that, I hear anecdotally that a lot of younger kids now are like saying, oh, so and so's are they them and all this kind of thing. You know, they're all like mocking it. So I would hope that would come out, but who knows? It's so dangerous to mock it, you know.
Well, it is, because anything can happen with even the young people. But I do see occasional glimmers of hope. I think you're right there, because I do hear of the rock and roll element still being there, where you rebel against the generation that's in front of you. So hopefully that will still kick in, and a lot of the.
It will. I mean, this was the thing that we hope that we all clung to 10 years ago. So it might take a long time, as these things do.
Oh yeah.
But you know, because one of my feelings about gender was that you know, I kept thinking as each new outrage happened, well, somebody's going to do something about this, aren't they? Because somebody usually does, don't they? Somebody did something about satanic memories, false memories, panic. Somebody did something about thalidomide. Somebody did something about lobotomies, and somebody did something about eugenics, and somebody did something about the post office eventually, and all this kind of thing. And then nothing happened.
Yeah.
And the kind of because when you were talking about, you know, our activism, I mean, my activism was limited to, I tended to just bung the occasional fiver at Stonewall or whatever, you know, put some money in a bucket, because I didn't think I was temperamentally set out for that kind of thing, you know, because campaigning requires patience and forethought, and it's like playing chess and engaging with people that you don't like and all those kind of things that I'm bad at. So I thought, well, I'll keep away from that, but I will certainly have people that are doing it. You know, I sort of thought of them as sort of polar explorers. You know, I wouldn't go anywhere near the Arctic, but I'm glad people do.
Yes,
and
that's good. Yeah, I like
that. But I think since everyone became a bloody activist, it's like, well, you're not. And I mean, if you look at Sex Matters, for example, I don't know if you've heard of organisations. A Marshall Star to Helen Joyce. Their comms and their campaigning is so steeped in experience and thought and care, and you know, it's a brilliant operation. On the other hand, there are some other sex realist campaigners that are very much more strident and forthright and out there, and I also think they're great. Because my attitude to this sort of thing is that it's a bit like the Second World War. That, you know, you don't fight Rommel in the same way that you fight, you know, someone in the Bavarian forest. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, I'm with you. Right,
all fronts are different. All approaches, you know, as long as the approach is effective, you need people in the vanguard pushing it, and you also need people going, well, we will have to talk very seriously to Annalise Dodds, and being quite measured and calm and give and take about it. You need both of those things.
You do. Totally agree. I think what you're getting to there is there's a part of your book, and again I'm going to show this now if I may. It's available now. We're showing the details about it. It's published by Forum Books there, and it is called Gay Shame: The Rise of Gender Ideology and the New Homophobia by Gareth Roberts here. Very kindly coming to talk to me about this today. But there's part of this where you talk about the leap.
Yes.
So I think that's a very interesting topic you got into there as well. But for me, it explained or put to rest in my mind a lot of the sort of, my God, what's going on? You know how you Can you explain for the sake of this, what you talk about?
It's kind of what I think you have to do when something like this happens, when, as you say, you're suddenly aware of something and you're not quite sure what it is or how it got in there, is to slow it all down, to try and take it almost like premise by premise, you know, like Socratically, and you know, try and trace it back very slowly. And I tried that, and the thing that I came up with was the leap. And what I think the leap is when you accept, you make what seems like a little logical jump, but it's actually a huge jump over a huge ravine. And what it is you accept that men who claim to be women can be classified as women. And that sounds obvious, as that's the main thrust of genderism. But actually, that wasn't what we were being asked before.
Yes.
We were being asked to acknowledge transsexuals, men who had undergone a process to surgery, whatever, to live their life as a woman, whatever that means. But suddenly we were being told that, even just a claim, by, for example, Alex Drummond, who's a big burly man with a bushier beard than me, who was sent by Stonewall into schools to tell everyone how he was a lesbian.
Yeah. One of the biggest insults to lesbians ever, by the way.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the leap, in a way, that as soon as you take that leap, which seems like a small thing that you don't have to think about, because we have to be kind to this man because this is what he thinks and it's just his life, but actually you're then just jumping over so many issues and problems, and obvious insanities start to arise. So that's what the leap is. It's kind of hard to describe in words. I had because I've written a whole chapter about it in the book, which sort of,
and it's really enlightening.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, because it's one of those things, when you say it out loud, it sounds, well, yeah, that's obvious. That isn't that obvious. But actually, you have to really think about it and see it in black and white to realise what a huge leap it is.
Well, you gave me a clarity, if you like, really, because a penny sort of dropped to use that phrase.
Yeah. Well, it did for me as well. Yeah, it did for me as well. When I realised that, it was like something going down, like a penny in a slot.
Yeah, you said that's the missing element. That's the thing I haven't been able to see.
Yeah.
Because from where I've been coming from and the experience of what it was to be, homosexual in the world that has just been infiltrated by all this stuff, I needed that clarity to be able to go, oh, that's it. And it's common sense as well.
Yes, yeah. It's just one of those things that as soon as you see that people have taken it, they can't go back on it, and it leads them into bizarre. Sorry, that's my door. Sorry. Was that right? Yeah. It's all right. He's getting it. Sorry, where were we?
We've talked about the leap and the clarity.
Oh yes, yeah. But yeah, it took me by surprise that I worked it out, and it did click in my mind. Like, oh God, that's it, isn't it? And I think what happens is that when people take that leap, you get things like say Nicola Sturgeon, for example. I mean, she took the leap, and then that leaves her completely vulnerable to what happened to her, and virtually destroyed her career.
Yeah.
I mean, there are other things going on as well, but that was a major one. That was a major plank.
Yeah.
Because what happened was, when she signed up to the leap, she took the leap. So when the Isla Bryson, Adam Graham double rapist in a women's prison, changing in women's cosmetics class, down to their underwear, he's doing it too, all that kind of thing. Yeah. When that hit the headlines, it left her with nowhere to go. So when she's being interviewed by ITV, and they say, and she's saying, well, this individual was placed initially in the women's estate and now is in the men's estate. And I'm saying, so if a man says he's a woman, it's not necessarily true. And she said, well, no, it is true, but, and it's like, she said, but, now about 2 weeks before that, she'd been telling the media that anyone that disagreed with the self-ID stuff that she pushed through the Scottish Parliament was not valid, a bigot, probably a racist and a homophobe.
That's right. Yeah. All the usual.
And this is, when you read The Women Who Wouldn't Wish, which you must, this is the sort of bedrock, often of Scottish National Party support, of grassroots, unfunded women campaigners who were very much of the left, and she's calling them that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is what happens, I think, when you take the leap, that it just starts leading you into these crazy situations. And it's happened to so many of them. And it happened to Hamza. He's been and gone. And it may well happen to
a few others.
It may well happen to, I mean, Keir Starmer's now rowing back. But
it's very slow as well, isn't it, Gareth? These people are very cautious, because otherwise they're going to get the people, they're going to get a lot more, they're going to get that minority at them all the time, like the nippy dog syndrome.
This is really the interesting thing, because with the election, if Labour get a bigger majority, it may perversely be better in the gender row, because that means they'll be able to ignore their activists.
I see what you're saying.
So they're keeping their powder kind of dry before the election. So hopefully the sensible people somewhere in Labour behind Starmer will know that this is a hot potato that they need to drop, and that when they get into power, they can safely do it without getting a lot of blowback. If they're forced into some sort of coalition, or they've got a small majority, or they're into, God help us, the Lib Dems and the Greens, that is exactly what happened to the SNP.
Yes.
They had to take on this crazy stuff, not only on gender, but all manner of things.
Yeah.
And that led them into real trouble. Now, sensible people in Labour, and I'm sure there are some, will know that this is a bad situation to be in. So they will want to avoid that. But it's so hard to tell because, on the one hand, you have Wes Streeting coming out and saying this stuff about, I was wrong. I cast the view, I accept it. Then you still have Annalise Dodd saying, we're going to have a trans-inclusive conversion therapy plan, which is basically inventing gay conversion therapy and putting it into law and making it unquestionable.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, I don't know whether she's genuinely that stupid, or whether she's doing the politician thing of plate spinning activists and lobbyists until she can get away with dropping it.
You can't tell anymore, Gareth. You used to be able to say, you used to be able to tell, but nowadays, because they're all game players as well, aren't they? Everything alleged. But it's a game that you just can't say anymore whether or not do you believe this. What always gets me as well, and what you beautifully write about in the book, is that this is a new homophobia, and none of them seem to know, or if they do know, they don't care.
I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier about acknowledging to yourself what you've been a part of, what you've been supporting. I think it's far too difficult to I almost feel I can do this to you, because I always think it's like a quote from the very first episode of Doctor Who, where Doctor Who says, their minds reject things they don't understand.
Great quote.
There might be Susan says that, I'm not sure. I think one of them does. But I think that's what happens, is that it's too much of a facer. So someone like Wes Streeting, actually, and Starmer, because they're a bit more slippery and they say stuff that they don't mean just as a matter of course, they're kind of better equipped to deal with that situation, because they rationalise all kinds of U-turns and flip-flops and all that kind of thing. Someone like Annalise Dodds or Angela Eagle or the blessed Lord Cashman is in a very different place, because they have a very saintly image of themselves.
Yeah.
They believe that they can't be wrong.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a real problem with people like that, and facing up to that, because, I mean, it's particularly if they've been dealing with, I mean, it was striking. I listened to, I think it was the Woman's Hour debate the other day, which they had various candidates on. They were talking about sex and gender as one of the issues. Right. And so many of the politicians were saying things like, well, I have a friend with a trans child. And I have, and you just think, do you?
Yes.
And as Graham Linehan says, this is kind of like the middle class fashion accessory that parents have now. And it's something that you can see again and again in people, in the media particularly. And this is another reason why it's spread so much in the media, is that you've had this thing encouraged, it's got into schools, it's got into kids' culture, it's got into the media. They then start transing themselves or non-binarying themselves or whatever they do as teenagers. The parents can't stand up against it, because they think it's progressive and it's nice, and I don't want to annoy my kid. Which
if they know about it, of course, Gareth, because a lot of this stuff is being done in schools without parents' knowledge.
Yeah, true. But I think with I mean, I always thought that my generation would be terrible parents. A lot of them anyway. As I sort of went into sixth form and uni. I looked around at the sort of posher kids around me and thinking, you're going to be appalling parents. And I think a lot of the time I was right.
Yeah.
And And so this stuff has, because of its lyingness and its weird false nature, got into all these things. So you now end up with politicians, and I mean, I think there are certain prominent media figures, and certainly Labour and some Tory politicians who now have a trans child.
Suddenly, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is a good point.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
And I think what happens there is that makes rolling back on it incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
Because particularly for kids that have gone down the medicalisation route, which is few but significant.
Yes. Yeah.
Telling them we've got it wrong. That's a bomb. That's dropping a bomb. I mean, that's just a terrible thing, because what the hell have you done?
Yeah.
For a parent,
when they're trusting adults around them.
Yeah. That for a parent, I just can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah.
We joke about this stuff and we go, oh, isn't it funny they can't row back? Okay, there is in some cases a really serious reason why they can't, and why this is going to be difficult, and there is no good way out of that.
And why it's going to take a long while as well.
It could be a whole generation. I mean, the Cass Review seems to have put a tin lid on it for the moment. But who knows? I mean, we don't know what those new Labour MPs are going to be like. There's going to be 100, 200 new Labour MPs. We don't know anything about who knows what they're like. There will be new generations of kids moving into the professions and the institutions that are all seeped in this stuff. So it's very hard to tell. It's very hard to know how long it's going to take. I mean, when Cass came out, which was only like about 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, there was kind of a lot of jubilation of like, oh, well, maybe this is it. Oh, there she is. And already with the election being called, took everyone's eyes off it. There's still stuff going on all around that this hasn't touched at all. I mean, last night saw that Amar Forstata has been investigated by the police, by the Met, for a year for the possible committing the crime of malicious communication online for some fairly innocuous tweet where she quoted somebody.
Yeah.
And that's still going on. You just think, well, no, hold on.
Yeah.
A lot of these institutions are absolutely riddled with this stuff. And that's going to take a long time to shift. And the very idea that we can sack all these people and it'll be fine, it's so difficult to turn institutions around, because the actual base level competence of keeping them going is so important.
Yeah.
Even if you had the power to get rid of these people, it would be a very dangerous thing to do for a number of practical reasons, because they know how it works. You can't get rid of loads of social workers and teachers, because, well, who will you get to replace them?
Well, that's it. The economy would go down within hours.
Yeah.
What we're basically seeing here, and this is a theory that I've had, I'd like to get your take on this as well, is that this has been one hell of a bandwagon. And it's all because people, as you touch on in the book, are genuinely quite nice, and they want to be seen to be doing the right thing.
Yeah.
But because the T, and now we've got that awful Q and everything else that comes on the back, it was enforced on LGB.
Yeah.
I generally think there's a knock-on effect for people that will remember what it was like for LGB in the 80s, especially because we're dealing with our generation now who have this sort of overhang guilt. It's a bit of a sort of. I mean, they also the T as well has been truncated. So it's as though it's a bracket, and when you get young people coming saying, "Oh, I'm trans now," well, what exactly do you mean? And what are you telling adults about this?
Yeah, I mean, the category is so wide; it includes so many different kinds of people.
Yes.
So you have like straight men that like dressing up in frilly knickers, and you also have young tomboy girls that aren't comfortable with their sexuality.
Yes.
And think that there's something wrong in being a lesbian. Well, how on earth do you square that circle? How on earth are those the same thing? They're not. So it is irrational and crazy and all those things. And I think what happens, I think you were getting at there, was that we're starting to see, I think there was a poll in America last week that support for gay marriage was going down.
Yeah.
For the first time. And I think it's obviously, it seems to me that what's happened is the conflation of LGB with all this other nonsense is having a blowback effect on homosexuals. And because lesbians and gay men are being associated with this kind of annoying, irritating, mad belief system, that it's flooding back onto us. And I don't think that's going to reach a serious level, hopefully, before a course correction can be made. But it's certainly something to think about. You know, it's all been such a terrible historical mistake. You know, it's sort of, and we're living in the middle of it. You know.
It's affected us all, really. I mean, I know you have, and I certainly have. We've lost long-standing friends because we're, you know, I'm now branded not the right sort of gay anymore because I won't bend the knee to all the. I can see, as you can, as others can, we can clearly see the homophobia in this.
Yeah.
We've got an awful lot of same-sex attracted men and women there that clearly cannot, and it's affected a whole way of life, really.
Yeah, a lot of, I mean, I would say long-standing acquaintances. That's what I think, because I think friends probably stick by you, and I'm sure that's the case for you too.
Well, you've got a good point there, because suddenly you suddenly realise who your friends aren't, don't you?
Absolutely.
It's sad, really. You know people for 40 years, and then suddenly you say something, and they go, "Oh no, I can't have that. I can't be seen with you."
I think with sorry, I've lost the thread now. What was the other thing you were saying about the
It's about the whole bandwagon thing, wanting to be seen, to be good, and also the blindness that's in same-sex attracted areas as well.
Yes, it's become. I mean, it's obviously homophobic and obviously a scandal that women can't meet without men now. And you know, that saying this is a lesbian event for women gets you sort of like protested against, that you have to keep it secret, that has to go underground. Now, that is obviously homophobic. It is blatantly, obviously homophobic. And it's always very interesting what happens with, I mean, I've had some blowback on this book, a little bit.
Have you?
Just you know, people leaving sort of 1-star Amazon reviews and that kind of thing. But I mean, I did an event in London. I did a launch. I just walked in fine, the front door. Everyone was very nice. It was a fine event. Now, when women launch their books or meet or discuss these things, the same things that I've been discussing, a lot of very annoying activists turn up and go sirens and try and block the door and shout and scream, and the police stand there going, oh, la-di-da. And the incredibly obvious double standards and sexism of this movement. I mean, you don't have to, you know, you'd have to be, it's so obvious, it's so clear that there's a very big problem with women going on here, a problem of some men towards women that permeates this whole thing. But again, I think that, you know, for a sort of what are called lib fems, you know, sort of trans inclusive feminists, I think for them to acknowledge that this is a problem is again a horrifying thing, because it would mean that you've been taken for an absolute mug, and I think it's better sometimes to admit that you've been taken for an absolute mug.
Oh, totally.
I mean, I can think of times in my past when I've had to do it. And it's better to take the L, as they say, and move on.
It's a shame that it's a shame we're not at a position where it's not. I mean, I think you're totally right, and you write about this in the book as well. I think you're right. I think it is because people have just gone down that sort of crusade, if you like, a lot, and to backtrack on it now would mean that they've wasted so much time, energy, effort, and of course, there's a fear. Of course, they would get a backlash from the immediate people that they are involved in. It's a real fear as well, because they are. We know this from experience. They can be really aggressive.
Yeah, absolutely. So one can just hope that we've seen people like Ruth Hunt or Wes Streeting, who are sort of doors flapping in the wind, weather vanes turning round anyway, so, you know. But one hopes that people like that rowing back might cause some others to row back. I mean, one interesting thing I've noticed recently is that some of the politicians and media figures have started saying things like, oh, the debate on both sides on this issue is so toxic. And that's very irritating, because it's not toxic coming from the sex realist side.
Yeah.
What's significant about it is that that's the first time they've acknowledged that there is bad stuff coming from the gender side.
Good point.
Before that, it was always, oh, how awful, these people are all homophobes and, you know, all that Nicola Sturgeon stuff. This is the first time they've started saying, oh, you know, it's so awful, isn't it? Oh, you know, the way, you know, people are sending very nasty tweets to J.K. Rowling and all this kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, okay, this looks like the very beginnings of a reverse ferret. You know, the first sort of twitching of the tail and the moving back. And they probably don't even realize they're doing it. But hopefully it means that they're just starting to edge back. I mean, Labour officially accepting the Cass report is a good sign. So hopefully it means they can start rowing back on other things, because it's going to be a problem for them if they don't. I mean, who knows, with them supermajority, they will have many, many other problems.
Yes.
Pretty soon. I don't think they're not going to get a honeymoon period of any kind.
No, they're going to go straight dive in. Yeah.
Yeah. The last thing they're going to want is this issue dogging them.
Yeah.
If they can drop it and get it out of the way pretty damn quickly.
Yeah.
They've got bigger fish to fry. And this is another annoying thing that people say. You get people going, oh, it's a tiny proportion of the population. Why are you making such a fuss about it? Well, then, in which case, why is it in your manifesto?
Yeah.
You know, if this is a culture war that other people are stoking and that nobody cares about it, you've put it in your manifesto that you're going to make the gender recognition process easier. Why?
Yes.
You know, if it doesn't matter, if this is all a culture war, why are you doing it?
Yeah. Exactly.
It can't be important when you do it and not important when anyone objects. It either is or it isn't important.
No, exactly. Make your mind up, basically.
Yeah.
No, that's all. And it will start from there as well, won't it? If fingers crossed, this begins to come in, and then the issues start to be addressed. And as we're saying in the show, it's going to take a long time, because that's how powerful and how swift, how clever, and how effective it was getting into all that great work that's been done over the past 20, 30, 40 years through various organizations I don't like to name, but they have businesses at their disposal. They have government departments at their disposal. And we've talked about the entertainment industry as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about that. Again, I think you're absolutely right about the fact that those people in the entertainment all over the world, not just in the UK, but all over the world, there will be elements in it where they think, why are we doing this? I don't agree with this necessarily. They'll be shut down, of course, or fired. But, you know, it's got to start somewhere, hasn't it? And these people have to learn.
You'd think that the bottom line would be the big thing. I mean, it's like, I have noticed, interestingly, I don't know if you follow him, but there's a wonderful YouTuber, Twitter guy called Mr. Menno.
Yes.
Who's fantastic about this. And he recently did a video where he was going to lots of outlets like Costa or WH Smith's, and this year, no pride flags.
It's interesting, isn't it? I was going to ask you about this, because we are recording this in the holy month of Pride.
Yes, we are.
A month now, everybody.
Yeah.
The difference is, of course, Gareth, you and I know that this thing has come from, and I always say to my American viewers, no disrespect here, but it all starts over there. So this whole thing about the month has come from America, and we unfortunately it's been adopted here. Our Prides start in June in the UK and go on till October in some cases. So it's not a month. But I've noticed this year, and I was going to ask you about this. It's not as in your face this year. And I find that very 2024 very interesting.
Yes, it is. And I think this is hopefully that the bottom line is starting to be reached. I mean, I can't understand how a company like, for example, Disney, can look at its disastrous figures and not put 2 and 2 together about this stuff.
Or have they? And they can't do it because of what you've said.
Yeah, there's a problem with blockage.
Yeah. And that they're too invested in the lead now as well.
Yeah, and also it's that they have a problem because the industry is so overrun by these people. So who are they going to get to make stuff that isn't captured by this stuff? You know, because the groupthink and the ostracism is so strong. So you know, if you're going to make a new Star Wars thing that's going to be not have this stuff dripping from it, who's going to write it?
It's a good point, especially as they're all favoured, aren't they? I mean, you know that from first time. These people are favoured, and some of them. I mean, I look at some of the stuff that these favoured people have been hiding. Bloody awful. I mean, come on. You have to. There's an ability to write a script. There's more of an ability in an act to write science fiction or fantasy. And I look at some of this and just think this is a glorified soap opera with a monster in it. I mean, you've written soap operas, so no
Yes, I mean, it all depends. I mean, I think there's been a general turn to a kind of view of the world that's quite sort of touchy-feely.
Yeah, don't say
I think that's sort of maybe inevitable in a way in society like ours that hasn't had a war for a very long time, you know, which is very unusual in historical terms. So I think that's sort of inevitable in a way.
Right.
But it's going to be incredibly hard because I think that a lot of people that would naturally gravitate towards that world, writing, directing, that kind of thing, are going to be put off. Are going to think, well, there's nothing there for me because they see the stuff as it is, and you know, there's not going to be, you know, if you think of, let's just pluck a name out of the air, Terry Nation.
God love him.
The 2020s equivalent of Terry Nation is not going to want to write for television.
No,
it's not going to be interested in that at all. He's doing something else completely, working in an aerospace factory or something, because you know that kind of very practical, pragmatic view of the world, is not something that we see. There you are. I'm being wound up.
That's fine. I was going to wind you up in a minute anyway, but I'll leave that joke and I'll speak to you next time. Listen, I want to say a huge thank you for joining me here today. I want to just publicize this again. Gareth, of course, has been talking about his book, which is available right now from Forum Books. I've been showing you the details all through this fantastic chat. It's called Gay Shame: The Rise of Gender Ideology and the New Homophobia. It's available now. I recommend it completely. It's a fantastic read. And I want to say to you, congratulations and well done for bringing this out, because this is the start, I think. I think it's essential. I think it needs to be pushed an awful lot by these bookshops and libraries and everywhere else. But well done. Congratulations. And
thank you very much, Justin.
It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for coming on to Who's Views. Don't forget to please like and subscribe. Yes, please do subscribe. It's free to subscribe. Come and join us on the channel. We've got a lot of playlists here for you, a lot of entertainment for you. This gentleman being just one. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next time. Thanks, Gareth. Cheers, mate. Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye.